Good morning, I'm WaywornWyrm, and welcome to my channel. And welcome to the first episode of Sword and Sorcery in Retail. Fast Food Fight Club. The bright and cheery colors of the Pandora Express fast food restaurant shone in contrast to the late hour. Still, the place was always accommodating, with a cheerful staff and a relatively tasty menu that included burgers and fries. The place was pretty busy for the time of night. 3 workers behind the counter served up food and drinks, while almost a dozen customers waited in line or chowed down at one of the bolted-to-the-floor table and chair combination units. At one of the tables sat Joanne Pollard and her boyfriend Milton Marsh. They were headed home from a long day of hiking and decided to stop for a bite to eat before getting home. Joanne shifted a bit in her chair, trying to get comfortable. I think her mom had told her years ago about how chairs like this are specifically designed to only be comfortable for about 10 minutes, flashed through her brain. The folded knife she kept in her pocket pressed uncomfortably into her side for a second. She hated the knife, but it was Milton's insistence, so she would be safe in case something ever happened to her. And since they had been dating for close to a year, she figured it was probably fairly serious, and she finally agreed to carry the knife with her about a week ago. Lilia Buck stood in line for her food impatiently. She was on a deadline and wanted to sit down and start working. It seemed to have been an intolerably long amount of time since she had put in her order. Generally, she avoided places like this, but at 11 at night, there weren't too many places that were in fairly decent neighborhoods that were brightly lit and open and didn't mind if you took up one of their tables for a couple of hours. She had a presentation that she had to present in the morning, and she was a long way away from where she wanted it to be. It would probably be a very late night for her. Reg Hall was in line to order at this new chain of restaurants. As he waited, he idly wondered if its name was close enough to Panda Express to warrant a lawsuit that Pandora Express would lose. When Reg was here normally at this time, which was honestly more often than he'd like to admit, there were generally only 1 or 2 people beside himself and the workers. It had been hard for him to readjust to everything, and he had trouble relaxing enough to sleep well, so he found himself coming here a lot. As Reg was finishing up his idle thoughts, some other customers entered the place behind him. They appeared to be tough-looking bikers, except they were all really short, like biker kids decked out in leather and chains. Reg didn't really take notice as 4 of them took place by the doors. 2 at each entrance and exit. And by not take notice, it was more of him ignoring the alarm bells that were starting to go off in his head. He had stopped paying attention to them when he had mustered out. He was no longer in a combat zone, so he didn't need to be hyper-aware or see danger in every action ever taken by anyone. He did take notice when 2 of these biker kids pushed past him and the 2 other people in front of him in line. The largest and toughest looking of these short gangbangers strode toward the counter with one of his lackeys pushing people aside as needed. A crazy thought went through Reg's head. I don't think he wants to order a monster meal. Then the kid began to talk, snarling as he did. You cheated last night, Longtooth. Then he couldn't contain his emotions any longer as he began to shout, Now we fight for real! He drew a long dagger from his left boot as he yelled. A couple of the customers nearest to the doors tried to rush out. And that is when Reg became fully aware of the blocked doors. "Nobody leaves," the tough-looking kid said, brandishing his dagger. "When we're finished with Longtooth, we're gonna have a little fun with the rest of you." Just as he finished saying that, the interior lights cut out, plunging the place into darkness for a second, before the emergency lights flicked on with an audible sound, bathing the entire place in an amber glow. "You want to play games?" the apparent leader bellows. "Fine! Kill them! Kill them all!" Reg snapped back into his military days at those words. Dropping his backpack, he pulled out the MP5 he kept stored in there illegally, and took aim at one of the gangers at the door. As he took aim, he swore he saw a scaly snout where the face should be. He'd seen a lot of shit in his day, but that flash of monstrousness was enough to distract him. His shot went wide and blew out one of the windows that made up the door. In the aftermath of the shot, Reg started breathing to calm himself down and collect himself before shooting again. And that's when he realized it wasn't a trick of the light. What he thought were gang children was something else. They looked like small, scaly lizard dog things that walked on two legs. Lilia snapped out of her impatient haze and rushed to the door, pulling a knife from her purse and attempting to stab the gang member who tried to block her. As she thrusted with her knife, the dumb fuck moved, trying to avoid it, and she watched in horror as her knife plunged deep into his neck as he screamed and collapsed. As he collapsed in front of her, she thought she saw a scaly claw where the hand should be for a second before she shook off such a weird notion. The world was all of a sudden turning to shit around Joanne, and she ran for the other door as the place was filled with the sounds of gunshots and screaming. She had just enough awareness to pull out the knife and unfold it before she got to the door. There would be no point in having it if she didn't use it when she had a chance. As one of the small people blocked her, it seemed to her for a second that she was fighting a small dragon before she feebly attempted to cut the woman in front of her. But her lack of experience with the weapon and with fighting meant that the woman was easily able to block her blows. Stunned, it took Milton half a second to get up and follow his girlfriend. Taking a second to look around, something in Milton's head reminded him of those stories of the things that lurked in the woods near where he grew up, scaly monsters and such. But it only flashed through his head. When he saw Joanne fighting and failing, he pulled out the fish basher he kept in his bag and swung with all his might. His swung connected with the face of this gangbanger, and a loud crack rang out as she crumpled to the ground. The lead gang member leapt over the counter at apparently Longtooth and swung with his dagger, but he didn't even come close to connecting as she threw off her headset and moved out of the way. The two remaining at each door suddenly decided it wasn't worth it, as their buddies were being killed in seconds in front of them, and they started booking it down the block. The last remaining gang member that wasn't the boss swung at Reg with a club of some sort, but he was able to easily block it with his gun. Reg then turned his gun around and smashed the butt of it into the face of the lizard creature in front of him, who went down with a gurgle. He yelled out, "Come on, help me! There's only one more of these creatures!" Something in Reg's yell broke through Lilia's terror. Looking down at the person she killed, it dawned on her that this wasn't a person. She had no clue what it was, but it wasn't the child she had just been scared she had murdered. Looking around, she ran at the creature, and then it hit her. The employee behind the counter, who was apparently trying to keep the leader's attention focused on her, was also one of these things, whatever they are. Before she could start to process that, she swung with her knife, but that realization kept tugging at her mind just enough to ensure she missed. Joanne wasn't sure what this man was talking about when he said creatures, even though in the dark she was seeing some weird things. But she had saw that there was only one left, and an older woman was fighting it, and the desire to become a hero welled up in her. She decided to join the fight. She sliced into the tough boss guy, but he didn't go down. Milton rushed after his girlfriend, wondering for a moment if it was worth it, as he was so far out of his depth. He cracked the boss in the head, who went down in a crumpled mess. The four people stood fairly close together, looking at each other, breathing hard. The full impact of what had just happened in the last 12 seconds was settling in as the lights flicked back on and the sounds of sirens started to fill the air. Before they could leave, one of the creatures, all four of them could see that these were creatures in the full light, who had been behind the counter, started to walk toward them. "Thank you for helping us. Please, take this. It might help you understand." She then handed each of them a business card and turned away to go back to work. All four looked at each other and nodded before they all ran out of the place and drove home. As they each reached home, they all looked at the business card, and they noticed it was for a bookstore called Sword and Sorcery, and it was emblazoned with the slogan, "Old Books for a New Age." Thank you so much for listening to the first episode of Sword and Sorcery and Retail. Be sure to tune in again on May 10th for the second episode, also named Sword and Sorcery and Retail. And make sure you tune in tomorrow for our regularly scheduled Friday show.